Okay, so yes, thank you everybody for taking time out this morning and to participate in this presentation on the South American palm weevil invasion into Southern California. So we're going to cover a lot today. I'm going to go over some of the general biology of this pest, point out the damage that it does to the palm trees, and it's a very characteristic set of symptoms you'll see once palm trees are infested with this pest. We'll discuss how it came into Southern California and how it's been moving throughout San Diego County. I'll provide you some updates on a project that we actually completed yesterday. 7 years of working on this weevil in the Bonita area around the Sweetwater Reserve. So I'll talk a bit about the trapping program that we ran, the drone surveillance, and yesterday we wrapped up the palm surveys that are outside of the reserve to see how many palm trees in residential areas this palm weevil has been killing. We'll briefly go over some of the management options you have, mainly referring to insecticide applications. We've done some big trials with Rainbow Tree Care Scientific, looking at different types of insecticides to protect palms. I'll cover a little bit about the different types of traps you can use for monitoring and theoretically controlling high density populations of palm weevils in infested areas. And we're now in the process of trying to evaluate in the field a new approach for managing palm weevil, and this is called attract and kill, and I'll go over those details with you towards the end of the presentation. And finally, at the end, I'll show you a website. It's got a QR code, which I'd like you to scan off the screens if you can do that with your cell phones, please. It will take you to a website where you'll find information on the South American palm weevil, but perhaps more importantly, there's an area there that you can report new infestations to help us track the spread of this insect throughout California. Currently, there are no active monitoring programs for this pest, and we are relying on community scientists to help us track the movement of this pest throughout Southern California. Okay, so this whole story started back around 2010 in Tijuana in the very northern part of the Baja Peninsula. It's just a couple of miles south of San Isidro in the southern part of San Diego County. I got this call from a guy down there saying, hey, our palm trees are dying down here, and we think it's that red striped palm weevil that you guys are trying to control in Laguna Beach. It's come into Tijuana and it's killing our palm trees. So I went down and had a look with Cristobal, and instead of finding a black weevil with a red stripe, we started pulling out all of these black weevils from these dead palm trees that were all through Tijuana. And it's like, Cristobal, I don't think this is the same weevil, because the one that we're trying to control in Laguna Beach looks like this. It's black with a red stripe. And we were told that this weevil is the red palm weevil, which is a devastating palm pest. And the USDA and CDFA identified this red striped weevil as the notorious red palm weevil, which actually looks like this, orange with brown, black spots all over it. So these weevils can have a lot of color variation. We call it phenotypic plasticity. And as a result of that, there's been some confusion in the literature. So the red striped weevil, which looks like that, had been synonymized or renamed the red palm weevil, which looks like this, because in some parts of Southeast Asia where these two weevil species are native, they have a lot of color variation. And some of the DNA work suggested that maybe they are the same thing. But either way, whether you're orange and black like this, or black with a red stripe like that, you definitely don't look like the weevil that we were pulling out of the palm trees in Tijuana. So the conclusion from this was this red striped palm weevil had invaded Laguna Beach. We don't know how it got there. We were working with the USDA and CDFA to contain this weevil, and we eventually eradicated it. And at the same time we were dealing with this red striped weevil, the South American palm weevil populations were building up in Tijuana, and they were starting to spill over into southern San Diego County. This was possibly the first time anywhere in the world we were dealing with two palm weevil invasions. Rhynchophorus palmarum, which is this black one, the South American palm weevil, which is now established widely throughout Southern California, but is mainly maintained in southern San Diego County. And this one from Bali in Indonesia, the red striped palm weevil, which is Rhynchophorus vulneratus, which is a species that we have conclusively demonstrated to be different to this one, the red palm weevil, which is Rhynchophorus ferrugineus. This weevil has caused massive problems for palm tree growers in the Mediterranean basin, where it has wiped out hundreds of thousands of Canary Island date palms, and it's estimated to have killed millions of edible date palms in the Middle East and throughout Northern Africa, where it is also invasive. It was introduced into these new areas through the trade in live palm trees. It is suspected that the imports of coconut palms out of Southeast Asia, where red palm weevil is native, into the Middle East resulted in the accidental introduction of this pest into that area. How this guy came to Southern California, we don't know. However, during our work on this pest in Southeast Asia, we did learn that the larvae of these big weevils, they're quite large, grubs are about this size, are a delicacy, and they're actually farmed. And we suspected that maybe these weevils had been introduced deliberately to provide a food source that's not commercially available in Southern California. Pure speculation, we have no evidence for that. Okay, so the life cycle is relatively simple. These are long-snouted weevils. Let me turn on my laser pointer here. There we go. So these are long-snouted weevils. Folks in San Diego County may be familiar with Diaprepes. It's a short-snouted weevil. And these long-snouted weevils, the females use that rostrum or beak to chew a hole into the top of the palm tree in the crown. She then lays these large eggs into that hole that she drills. Those eggs hatch into these large grubs. And it's the feeding by these grubs in the apical meristematic area, or the palm heart, the crown region of the palm, that results in palm mortality. Once that growing area in the top of the palm is destroyed by these weevil larvae, the palm can't recover and it starts to die. When these large grubs have finished their development, they will then move to the outside of the palm tree. Often they will drill tunnels into the base of the fronds, and they'll make these pupation chambers, and they'll gather up these palm fibers and spin these very tight cocoons. If you crack it open, you'll see that this is a pre-pupal larva that has finished spinning up its cocoon. It will then molt or shed its skin one more time, and it will enter the pupal stage. And you can see the wing buds now developing on this pupa here that we have extracted from that pupal case. Then within that cocoon, this pupa will undergo metamorphosis. And then after a couple of weeks, these large adults will emerge. And what I find amazing about this, and it's just like butterfly development, is that you can go from a grub, which essentially looks like a large worm, to a beetle that has legs and wings and can fly around. Males and females are present in the population. They're about equal numbers of each, about a 50-50 sex ratio. And the males are easily identified. If you look at the top of the snout, you'll see all these bristles or setae that sit on the top of the snout. Only the males have this beard that sits on the top of the nose. Females, the rostrum is very smooth and they don't have this. So if you find some, click them in a trap, you dig them out of the palm tree and you want to know what sex you're looking at, hold them up, look at the top of the nose, and if you see those bristles, you have a male weevil. The life cycle can take about 140 days, but it really depends on the quality of the food and the temperature in which they are growing. I think an important thing to take home from this is that once those weevil grubs are in the top of the palm tree and they're concealed, very hard to see them, and they're protected from a lot of the chemical treatments that we can use against them. And they're extremely devastating to the palm. Basically, once you're infested, there's no recovery unless you can get insecticides in there and kill out the infestation before it damages the apical meristematic area. This is the type of damage you're likely to see. These basal sheaths that sit at the bottom of the fronds will be drilled out with these holes that the grubs chew as they move their way into the base of the fronds. These are the pupation chambers that the grubs will make, and it's within these areas that they will pupate and draw in those fibers and spin those very tight cocoons. And because the palm heart has been so badly damaged, it is no longer connected to the trunk of the tree. It just drops off the palm tree. Then you end up with this trunk, which basically is surrounded by this halo of dying palm fronds. And in the background here, you can see some healthy Canary Island date palms. They still have those beautiful upright fronds. The apical meristem is still healthy and it's growing and projecting up those fronds, but it's in the central part here that those weevil grubs feed, and it's that damage that kills the palm tree. If you look into the palm, the weevil larvae will be feeding in there, and they will turn that palm heart into a very hot oatmeal type like substance. It is very warm. It has an extremely distinctive odor. There's a lot of fermentation activity going on in there. And you can see some of the mush that I've pulled out of this infected palm. They may do a little bit of damage to the wooden part at the top part of the trunk, but these weevils will not drill their way down through the wood to get to the roots. They're really most interested in feeding in that palm heart that sits right at the top of that very tough woody trunk. Removing these palm trees is expensive and it's dangerous, and it really should be done by certified arborists. So you can see here we're taking down these palm trees, and we have the crew come in, we take the fronds off, we wrap them up in these tarps, so if there's any weevils in there, they're not going to be spread as they drive the truck away. Ideally, this material could also be run through a chipper, and that will kill any pupae and larvae that are in those fronds. The infested trunk here is cut off at the ground, put onto the back of this flatbed truck, and we cover it up with a tarp. Again, we don't want any life stages falling out of this infested palm trunk as it's moved to the landfill. And ideally, you'd like all this material to be buried within a 24-hour period. You don't want it sitting around for weeks, not being managed, because any pupae that are in the top of this trunk, the adults will start emerging, and you could end up inadvertently creating new infestations in areas where you move this infested material to. Okay, so the dropping hazards from these palms are significant. This is Imperial Beach in San Diego County. Long run of these Canary Island date palms has been killed by the South American palm weevil. The dead fronds drop off. This dropping activity is greatly accelerated during storm events or when it's windy and rainy. Piling up here against the fences, they drop onto cars. There's a lot of large spines at the base of these fronds, so they can produce quite a significant hazard to especially young kids or pets that are running around. And you need to get these things cleaned up and taken care of promptly. Now, I would argue that South American palm weevil is potentially a far more deadly weevil than the notorious red palm weevil. And this is because South American palm weevil vectors a palm-killing nematode called the red ring nematode, which causes this red ring disease in palm trees. The weevil and red ring nematode are widely spread throughout Mexico. And I've been into the coconut plantations down in Colima, and this is an amazingly bad problem for the coconut growers down there to deal with. Red ring nematode has not yet been recorded from Southern California, but like a lot of disease problems that we have, we get the insect vector first, and then years later, the pathogen shows up. And we saw this with Asian citrus-psyllid. We got the Asian citrus-psyllid widely established throughout Southern California. Then about 4 or 5 years later, after the insect had established the disease, Huanglong Bing started appearing in citrus trees in Southern California. So these adult weevils carry the nematodes in their bodies, or they may be attached to the outside of their bodies. And when the weevils get to a new palm tree, if they feed through the release saliva, or they defecate or lay eggs, the nematodes will leave the weevil's body into the palm tree and then begin an infestation. Once that palm is infected with red ring nematode, it seems to be a death sentence for that palm. I'm unaware of any ways of curing the palm tree once it has the nematode in it. If you have a weevil infestation alone, you may be able to kill it off with insecticides. But if that weevil has already inoculated the palms with red ring nematode, and then you apply insecticides and kill off the weevil, your palm won't die from weevil attack, it'll die from a red ring nematode infection instead. So, as I mentioned, not known to be in California yet, but we are anticipating that it will show up. Okay, so some Google research. South American palm weevil is known to feed on and attack a lot of different palm trees. It really does great in coconuts in Mexico. We know from our experience here in Southern California that it really loves Canary Island date palms. And the edible date palm, Phoenix dactylifera, is also a known host. At this stage, we have not seen any edible date palms killed by South American palm weevil. However, this is not surprising. If we compare the invasion of South American palm weevil to the red palm weevil invasion in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, that red palm weevil follows the Canary Island date palms, wipes them out, and then once it gets up against that urban ag interface, those Canary Island date palms act as massive breeding incubators for red palm weevil, and then they start pushing into those date palms. And once they're into those date plantations, they'll establish and start causing economic losses. So I suspect that there is a preference for certain types of phoenix palms. Canariensis is high up on that preference list, but they will go to Dactylifera or the edible date palm when their most preferred species are either rare or no longer available for attack because they've basically been all killed. Okay, so what are we seeing in San Diego County? There's a massive natural field experiment going on right now. South American palm weevil is encountering palm hosts with which it has no evolutionary history with at all. And it is now presented with a huge buffet of palm species that have been collected from around the world. They're either growing in people's backyards or like these palms here at Balboa Park. They're now available for attack. So I'm going to do a quick run through of the palm species that we have recorded as being killed by South American palm weevil. Guadalupe palms, Brahea edulis, have been killed. We have these blue fan palms, which have been killed by South American palm weevil. You can see the staining here on the trunk, which is really quite unusual to see because normally most of the activity is up here in the crown. We've had these Senegal palms, Phoenix reclinata, killed off. They seem to really like these Chilean wine palms, Jubea chilensis, probably because it's got a big thick trunk and a lot of apical meristematic meat sitting at the top here of the trunk for the weevil larvae to feed on. So here's another shot of the Chilean wine palms going down in Balboa Park. They're in people's residential areas. Ricardo Aguilar with Aguilar Plant Care, he's a arborist. He sent us these shots of Chilean wine palms going down in people's gardens. They noticed that the fronds had those characteristic holes at the bottom where the weevils were pupating. They went up and had a look. The apical meristem's been completely eaten out, and within that hollow they found these pupal cocoons and some adult weevils as well. Sable Bumidana has been taken out by South American palm weevil. These Molokai palms have been taken out. This is an interesting record because apparently this palm is indigenous to Molokai in Hawaii. It's found nowhere else. I mean, it's endemic to that area and it's growing in people's backyards here. Prochardia minor has been taken out by the weevil. These Parajubeas have been killed off by South American palm weevil. And here, this is a common one that we see a lot of in Southern California and San Diego. These are Bismarckia palms as well. They seem to be susceptible to attack by the palm weevil as well. More shots of those palms being killed off by South American palm weevil. We've had one report of these Dipsis triangle palms being killed off. However, there were no confirmatory photographs of this palm being killed. However, the guy that did send me that information had photographed his Bismarckia in the previous set of slides as being killed by the weevil. So I think he was pretty knowledgeable about what the weevil looked like. And they are known to attack the Washingtonias, especially Washingtonia robusta. And this was the first record of South American palm weevil was down there, Todos Los Santos, down there, Cabo San Lucas, at the very southern tip of the Baja Peninsula. The first infestations of South American palm weevil were in that area. Somehow they got out of mainland Mexico onto the peninsula, and they have subsequently spread their way up, basically from Cabo San Lucas all the way up through the peninsula and into Southern California. So we don't know if palm weevil was responsible for this. Somebody sent this photo and told me that palm weevil had killed their Washingtonia robusta, and this is what had happened. So I can't confirm that. So a question I get asked a lot is, well, you know, those are big weevils, they got wings, you know, can they fly? Yes, they can fly. They're very strong flyers. And this video shows flight mill trials that we have run in the lab, highly artificial. We hook the weevils up to these flight mills, and as they fly around in circles, each rotation is about 1 yard or a meter. And the laptop computer records how far they fly, how fast they fly. Do they fly more in the morning? Do they fly more at nighttime? And we can look at whether or not flight differs between males and females, young weevils, old weevils, mated females, unmated weevils, starved weevils, you know, well-fed weevils. So the data that we have for these weevils is really very interesting. On average, within a 24-hour period, these weevils can fly about 25 miles. We don't know whether or not they do that in nature. You know, given San Diego County and the high densities of palms that are available, they're probably not flying very far to find their next palm. However, should they find themselves in an area without a lot of palm hosts, yes, they could probably fly a considerable distance. And you can see in this graph here, we had some females that were flying, you know, upwards of 75 miles in a 24-hour period. And we termed these outliers super dispersers. Most of the population is clustered down here in like about the 25-mile range, but we have a few that are capable of astronomical flight distances. And some of these weevils will fly non-stop for about 4 or 5 hours on the flight mill. It takes a lot out of them, and they'll lose about 20% of their body weight. I think if that was to happen to us in a 24-hour period, we would probably fall over and die. Yeah, really remarkable. Look at that. We had one female that flew 93 miles in a 24-hour period, another female that flew about 75 miles, and these males and females here were flying about 62 miles. But these guys, these super dispersers, only constitute about 10% of the population that we were testing. So another way that the weevils could move rapidly over very long distances would be through the inadvertent movement of infested palm trees. There are no quarantines for South American palm weevil in San Diego County, so theoretically you could go into an infested area, dig up an infested palm tree, move it to LA, San Luis Obispo, or, you know, all the way up to San Francisco, Las Vegas, you know, wherever those palms need to be moved to. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the very first record of South American palm weevil in the Baja Peninsula was down here in Cabo San Lucas, and that was found in the year 2000. South American palm weevil is well known throughout most of mainland Mexico here. Its most northern record is up here in Colima, but is known all through Costa Rica, through Central America, and down into South America, where it's also a major pest of palms, especially in Brazil. So here in the southern part, it was found in 2000. 10 years later, the first populations were detected up here in Tijuana. So it was moving northwards at about a rate of 8 miles per year, assuming it just spread its way up the peninsula naturally, and nobody moved infested palm material from, say, Cabo San Lucas all the way up to Tijuana. So it probably moved on its own, just colonizing palms as it moved through these small villages. There's a lot of palm tree hosts there. And I think this is a great example how humans have made the invasion process easy for this weevil. We have planted palms in areas where normally there would be no palms growing, middle of the desert. We've planted these palms in high densities in small cities and villages, and we water them, and it's provided basically stepping stones for this weevil to work its way up the peninsula all the way to San Diego County. So right now, the northernmost records that we have, and we're just talking about this with Megan, are around the San Marcos, Encinitas, Oceanside area, and it's been in this area, at least San Marcos, since 2019. I mean, it's spread really slowly. And I think the most eastern record we have right now is out towards El Cajon, which is not far from this area, out towards the east. So if the flight mill studies indicate that it has this incredible capacity for flight, why isn't it moving very fast? And I think one reason for this is that there's just so many palm trees for it to feed on. There's no motivation to undertake really long distance flights. So they just move from palm to palm, and then they have to fly maybe like 100 meters, 100 yards to get to the next palm tree, and then they're happy. And they'll just keep feeding on these Canary Island date palms. Okay, alarmingly, and some of you may have heard this if you logged onto the Zoom talk early, live palm weevils were found by hikers in Palm Desert in April 2023. This is about 10 miles from Indio, which is a major edible date producing area. Now, CDFA, until the money ran out, had been doing proactive monitoring throughout this area, and they had trapped live adults previously in the Coachella Valley. Where they came from, we don't know. There's no established populations out there. But what our flight mill studies suggest to us is that these encounters out in the Coachella Valley, for example, could be the super dispersers that we have identified from flight mill trials that are capable of flying 70 to 100 miles in a 24-hour period. And as these super dispersers leave these infestation hotspots in San Diego County, they're probing new areas as they go out exploring. And possibly at some stage, they'll find a susceptible palm tree, one gravid mated female will colonize that palm tree, maybe a Canary Island date palm in Palm Desert, maybe a Canary Island date palm in Palm Springs, and then that'll be the beginning of the infestation. They will colonize those palms, and then they will start putting very heavy pressure onto the edible date production areas in the Coachella Valley. And a lot of the motivation for this research that we're doing is to try to get ahead of this infestation, to try to get ahead of this problem and come up with monitoring and management solutions for the edible date growers before this pest establishes in the Coachella Valley. And we've had a long window of time to do this, so we've been quite fortunate, and we've also been very busy on this project, and I'm going to share the results of those studies with you now. Okay, so just to recap, South American palm weevil widely established in Tijuana. It's killed thousands of palms there now. Starting around 2011, we started getting reports of this weevil in southern San Diego County. By about 2015, that weevil had established in San Isidro. Then I followed it up here to this place called the Sweetwater Reserve. This is a riparian area in Bonita in San Diego County. It has thousands of naturalized Canary Island date palms in it. It has been an incredible incubating site for South American palm weevil. So we've been running monitoring studies in that Sweetwater Reserve for the last 6.5 years. And yesterday, Tuesday, we finished the palm survey. So in a north, south, west, and east direction around the Sweetwater Reserve, we've been monitoring the survivorship rates of 521 Canary Island date palms. The reason we were doing this was that there was no reason to suspect that the weevils would just stay here in the Sweetwater Reserve killing palm trees. Some of them were going to leave and spread out from this infestation hotspot and start killing urban palms. And we were interested in knowing, wow, how big a problem is this actually going to be? So to get a handle on that, we GPS tagged 521 palms, and we've followed them for exactly 7 years. That project ended on Tuesday, and I'll be sharing those newest data with you. Okay, so here we are, Sweetwater Reserve. That should say 521, not 519. And you can see the urban palms here in these green flags where we have tracked the mortality or survivorship of those palms. Here is the Sweetwater Reserve. We had 10 monitoring traps set up in here. That program finished in January of this year, and we have 6.5 years worth of monitoring data for those sites. So we have a very good idea of what South American palm weevil is doing in this area. And those data are helping to inform some of the management plans that we are developing now. This is the Sweetwater Reserve. If you're not familiar with it, here's the riparian area. There's water running through here most of the time. It drains out this way to the Pacific Ocean. You can see it's heavily urbanized around this area. So a lot of houses. This is the Glen Abbey Cemetery, which also used to have a lot of Canary Island date palms, with those pretty much all being killed off by the South American palm weevil now. And if you look with Google Earth, you can see the Canary Island date palms here coming up over the oak and willow understories here. And here's a dead palm that's actually been killed by South American palm weevil. So they kind of look like sea anemones. And when they're killed, they take on this brown umbrella or brown mushroom type shape. Okay, so in the reserve, we hung up 10 of these bucket traps. And we loaded up those bucket traps with the commercially available aggregation pheromone for South American palm weevil. And in there, we would put this pot, which has the fermenting bait. You need both things. You need the aggregation pheromone and you need fermenting bait. So for the fermenting bait, we used dates, a packet of baker's yeast, and some water. And probably within an hour, the yeast would start, once it's mixed with the water and the dates, would start fermenting, and it releases a actually quite a pleasant smell. I was thinking about this. This is maybe how the pharaohs made beer way back 2,500 years ago. Date beer. Basically, we have fermenting date beer sitting in this trap. When coupled with the aggregation pheromone, it is an incredibly attractive combination for the weevils. They fly to our bucket trap. They walk up the burlap. They go in these holes here. We had some antifreeze glycol in there, so when the weevils fell into the traps, they would drown. Every month, we go out to the site, check the 10 traps, count the numbers of males and female weevils. And on the graph that you see here are the data from those 6.5 years of trapping data. First off, I want to point out this orange line that you see here is the percentage of females that come to the traps. it is consistently averaged out at about 66%. So we end up catching in the traps about 66% females and about 33% males. The other thing I want to point out to you here is that there are population ups and downs throughout the course of the year. These weevils are not active at the same rate year round. Numbers start to increase after April. They will peak around July. Then July through December, the numbers drop off again as temperatures start to decline and as the days get shorter. And you can see the ups and downs are very, very clear here. We have periods of little weevil activity from, say, November through March. Then after March, going into April, weevil activity increases again, peaks in July. And then from July down through December, there's just a steady decline in weevil activity. So how can we use these trapping data? I've summarized them here. See, the weevil numbers take off in April, they peak in July, and then there's a steady decline going down towards December. So 6.5 years of data we use to generate this very, very good data set here. Okay, 80% of the weevils are trapped between April and October. This is peak flying activity. So how can we use those data to our advantage? A lot of these Canary Island date palms are pruned so they look like pineapples at the top. If you're going to do any sort of activity that's going to damage the palm, releases plant volatiles because you're damaging the palm through this cutting activity, you probably want to consider doing your pruning activity maybe between December and March when flight activity is low. Don't do it during the middle of summer when flight activity is high. The weevils will smell those cut odors and they will be attracted to those palm trees. Okay, so the other thing that we did at the Sweetwater Reserve is that every 4 months or so, we'd fly the drone over the reserve and we would count the number of palm trees that have died. These are the high resolution photographs that we would take. So you can see the healthy palms, you can see the dead palms here. We'd stitch all those photographs together. Every palm was numbered, and every 4 months or so, fly the drone, get a new data set, and count the number of palm trees that were alive and dead. We've finished this study. Mike is behind on the data because it takes a lot of time to go through those photographs. So we had 726 palms mapped, but you can see here just a steady upward trend, even though its data's a few years behind now, in palm mortality. And that has certainly continued, and we're going to finish this study. So maybe next time when I give this talk, this graph will be updated. However, the driving survey around Sweetwater Reserve shows a very similar trend. You can see when we started this survey back in August of 2016, the 521 palms that we selected were all healthy. There was no evidence of any sort of mortality or weevil infestation in those palms. By August 12th, 2023, of those 521 palms that we've been monitoring in the north, south, west, and east direction around the Sweetwater Reserve, 67% of them have been killed. But you can see that as we've gone up over the years, that rate of mortality has started to decline. It's almost like it's reaching an asymptote now. So it looks like you're not going to end up with 100% kill of these Canary Island date palms throughout these infested areas. But these data suggest to us that at least 70% of those palms are probably going to be taken out by the weevil. So how can you protect your palms from attack? Right now, the best options that we have are insecticides, and there's 2 groups of insecticides that are being used for control of palm weevil. These systemic insecticides, which are all, basically most of them are neonicotinoids like imidacloprid or dinotefuran, for example. These can be applied as drenches straight into the crown. You can apply them as soil injections into the roots, into the soil, and the roots will take up that toxin, translocate it through the trunk, and then those poisons will then start to accumulate in the crown where the weevil larvae are feeding. Trunk injections are another way to get these systemics in. Don Hoddle does not recommend this because palms are unusual. Is that when you damage the trunk, they won't heal themselves, and those wounds will remain open, and they could become attractive to other weevils, or they may become infected with pathogens. Some of these trunk injection techniques use septums that get drilled into the trees. There's silicone, and when you're finished injecting, you can snap the cap back over and that'll seal up the wound, or you can just cover the hole with silicone and then reuse those sites to apply insecticides again. So with all these systemics, whether you're putting them into the trunk as injections, trunk paints also work, or as drenches or pressure injections into the soil, They're all being translocated through the trunk, and they will accumulate in the crown where those weevil larvae are feeding. Another way to control them is through these contact insecticides, where basically you spray the crown with a contact insecticide, maybe some type of pyrethroid that leaves a lethal residue on the foliage. So any weevil adults that are flying into that crown and get attracted to that crown, touch that foliage and they die. So as I mentioned earlier, we've run these large-scale insecticide field trials. We've demonstrated that dinotifuran, if you apply it as a bark spray or as a soil injection, seems to be effective at protecting those trees. Dinotifuran and this imidacloprid applied as a crown spray, it's also effective. We've used dinotifuran and imidacloprid as soil injections, and this product, imamectin benzoate, applied as a trunk injection, appears to be quite active as well. The thing I like about imamectin benzoate is that it's also known to have nematicidal activity. So if red ring nematode shows up and the tree is infected with South American palm weevil, imamectin benzoate may be able to kill not only the weevil, but also take out the red palm weevil. At this stage, we have no evidence for that, but in other systems, imamectin benzoate is known to have nematicidal or nematode killing properties. These treatments need to go on probably at least twice a year. Most of them are being applied now prophylactically to protect palms from weevil attack. If you are lucky and you can diagnose a palm tree during the early stages of weevil attack, these insecticides may have a curative effect on that infestation. Kill off the larvae before they do a lot of damage to the tree. So I'm going to take you now to Valencia in Spain and Cape Spartel in Morocco, where they've been dealing with the red palm weevil situation for quite a long time. And you can see here different ways of treating these palm trees to control the weevils. So here in Valencia, the applicator has this long pole, pressurized pump here, and the insecticides are moved up through the pole, and they basically drench the crown this way. Cape Spartel and also in other parts of Spain, they attach these permanent lines, these essentially polyethylene irrigation pipe that they run up into the crown. They're attached permanently to the trunk, and you apply your pressure pump here and then just push the insecticides up to the crown. Here you can see at Cape Spartel, every one of these Canary Island date palms is protected against red palm weevil, and they all have these hoses that run up into the crown. Material gets pumped up there, basically saturates the crown and kills any weevil adults and larvae that may be up there. If it's a systemic material, it may be absorbed into the crown and provide some sort of long-lasting activity. So I just highlighted the hoses there so you can see them. Additionally, in this area of Morocco, they have these slow-release applicators. You can see they've cut a window in the crown here, put this basically a container that's packed with insecticides in a spike, and it just slowly leaches out into the crown area of the palm. So they've got two things going on here. You can pump up maybe a contact insecticide this way, and maybe have a slow release systemic moving into the crown through these reservoirs here. So it is possible that once your palm tree is quite badly damaged, you may be able to resurrect it through the use of a systemic insecticide. In February of 2018, when we were monitoring the health of this palm, it was basically a trunk with a ring of leaves around the top of it, and I classified that as dead. Out of curiosity, we came back in August of 2018, and it was still alive. It was like, what's going on here? And you looked at it, you could see this little carrot spriglet of growth starting to come up through the center here. The weevil larvae had damaged an immense amount of apical meristem, but it must have left a tiny amount that wasn't damaged. And the owner just basically got up with a bucket, mixed up his insecticides, he just like poured it into the top in a last-ditch effort to try and control the weevils that were in there. So we decided to follow this palm to see what happened. February of 2019, 6 months later, it's starting to grow up and looking pretty nice. August 2019, it'd be hard to say that this palm was almost dead, you know? It's looking great now. 2020, it's looking magnificent. You'd have no idea that this palm had almost been killed by South American palm weevil. Oh, August 2021, too much hassle, too expensive. And then finally the thing succumbed to Weevil attack, was chopped down and removed. So the take-home lesson from this is, and I tell everybody this, once you're committed to these prophylactic insecticide applications, you are on the treadmill for the rest of your life. You give up on the treatments, there's a good chance that the South American palm weevil will come back and kill your palm tree. Then all the money and time that you've put into treating those palms has essentially been wasted. Sometimes these palms may be able to recover on their own. This was another palm tree, August 2021, that we had classified as dead. Watching it, and a little sprout started coming out. And when I was taking this photo, the homeowners came over to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm taking a photo of this palm tree. It's coming back to life. Did you guys treat it with insecticides? And they said, "No, we didn't do anything. It's dead." I said, "You need to come around this side of the fence and have a look." And they go, "Oh my God, look at that. It's starting to grow back again." "Well, we're still not going to treat it with insecticides." I said, "Okay, that's fine. Well, let's see what happens." So you can see it's recovering on its own. Owners hadn't noticed it. No insecticides applied. Starting to grow out, getting larger, looking good. Maybe it's going to come back to life on its own. Maybe the weevils won't find it again. And then, 6 months later, weevils found it and then finished it off properly this time. So no recovery possible now. It is well and truly dead. So a question I get asked a lot is, what traps should we use? Should we use those hanging bucket traps like you've used in the Sweetwater Reserve? Or there's these new traps that everybody's talking about, these percussion traps, which sit on the ground. So the bucket trap is essentially a bucket with 4 holes, the fermenting bait and the aggregation pheromones. The weevils fly to it, walk up the burlap, fall in the holes, drop into the antifreeze, and they drown. This percussion trap acts a little differently. The weevils land on the ground, walk along it, go up the side of the trap, and then at the top, there's a funnel-like entrance, and they drop in, and once they're in, they can't get out. With the bucket trap, and we did this with video data, the weevils would go in and out the holes a lot, and then most of them fly away. So when we trialed them, we noticed that the average number of weevils that we caught in the bucket, shown here in magenta, was always much, much lower than what we were catching in the percussion trap. You catch 6 times more weevils in the percussion trap. And the reason for this, based on the videos that we set up around the bucket trap and the percussion trap, is that about 30% of the weevils that enter these holes end up dying in them. Whereas about 97% of the weevils that go down the hole in the top of the percussion trap stay in the trap. They can't get out. And it's the design that makes it much more effective. So if you're thinking of using a trap to control or monitor for South American palm weevils, don't use the bucket trap like this. It's not very good. Get hold of a percussion trap if you can. Or if you can't buy the percussion traps, because they are hard to find right now, what you could do is take the bucket trap, and this is what I've done to it, is I've bought some small funnels that you use in the kitchen or for oil, cut those and insert those into the holes on your bucket trap. The weevils will go into the funnel, fall out, then they can't get back out again because that funnel shape makes it very hard for them to find the exit hole. But because it's wide in the opening, then narrows down where it drops into the bucket, that makes it quite effective. And which is basically what this percussion trap does. Instead, you have 4 little funnels stuck in these 2-inch diameter holes that you use a hole cutting saw for to cut into the bucket. So you could make a hanging percussion trap that's sort of a hybrid between the percussion and the bucket trap by inserting those funnels. I've used those several times for catching weevils because I want to keep them alive for experiments, and they work quite well. Okay, what type of bait should you put in the trap? Well, we've looked at different types of yeasts, different types of bait, and amazingly for us, this hardly ever happens. The bait that we just started using for the hell of it actually worked the best. So we use water, edible dates, and baker's yeast. It works great. Whatever those odor profiles are that are coming out, when they mix with the aggregation pheromone, the weevils love it. We looked at water, dates, and a beer-making yeast. Here, Saccharomyces pastorianus. Didn't work as good as the baker's yeast. Then we replaced that with a fruit wine yeast, Saccharomyces bayanus. That didn't work as well as Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the baker's yeast. So baker's yeast, very easy to get, very cheap. 1 packet, some dates, some water, put that into your container. Make sure the container has some holes in it so the fermentation products can escape. Put that in your trap with the aggregation pheromone, and the weevils love it, and they'll fly to those traps in pretty good numbers, and you'll catch them. Okay, caveats for traps. Don't hang them their palm trees, especially that unmodified bucket trap. 70% of the weevils that go to the bucket trap won't get stuck in there, and they may end up attacking your palms. So as I mentioned, only 30% of the weevils that are attracted to a bucket trap are retained by it. The other thing we've learned is that if you put the buckets in full sun, you're not going to get very good captures. We recommend that the bucket traps or your weevil traps go in partial or full shade. We put some thermometers in there, and what we figured out was that if the traps sit in the full sun or catch the afternoon sun, temperatures can get up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit in those traps, and we think this shuts down the pheromone and the bait attractiveness. Basically, the products that you're putting in there, the biologically active products, are being sterilized by the high heat. So put your traps in full or partial shade, make sure they're not being hit by the midday sun or the full afternoon sun, and they'll do much better. Okay, take-home messages on traps. If you can get the percussion trap, use it. If you can't get the percussion trap, use that bucket trap design, but put the funnels in through the holes, and that'll increase the retention rates of the weevils. They won't be going in and out of the holes all the time and then flying away. Bait type, we recommend using the dates, water, and baker's yeast. It is possible to drive weevil numbers down by intensive trapping, but it is very labor expensive. So trap placement, don't put your traps on or near the palm trees that you're concerned about. If the weevils don't go into the trap, they may end up attacking that palm. One thing I've suggested that is if you have an area of concern, maybe you put your traps within half a mile, maybe a mile away. If you catch weevils in those traps, that suggests that there's weevil activity in the vicinity of the palm trees that you're worried about, and then you should begin a control program. You don't have to put your traps in any special place. They can sit behind a dumpster. We've done this work in Saudi Arabia, where we've put buckets out in the middle of the desert, and there's nothing but sand and rocks out there. We caught weevils. I don't know where on earth they came from, but they would show up in the middle of the deserts in Saudi Arabia. This was red palm weevil, and we would catch them. And place your traps in the shade if you can do that. That'll increase the longevity and efficacy of those traps. Okay, don't do this. This is down Fashion Island in Orange County, where the weevil traps were hung in these palm trees. Thankfully, they weren't attacked by the weevils. There's no records of palm weevils in Orange County, but these traps sitting up in the palm tree, releasing fermentation odors and aggregation pheromone, that's just got to be a blazing red siren calling in weevils. So don't do this type of trapping program. You may occasionally find other weevils in the traps. The agave snout weevil will very rarely end up in those traps. They're attracted to the fermenting bait. They're not attracted to the aggregation pheromone. The aggregation pheromone is very specific to South American palm weevils. These agave weevils tend to be smaller than the South American palm weevil, and their rostrum or their nose tends to be more curved and much thicker. And you can see here we have a South American palm weevil female. She has no bristles on the top of her snout. So the pheromones, non-toxic, airborne. The South American palm weevil has its unique pheromone. It's only attractive to South American palm weevil and nothing else. They've been widely used in Central Mexico, Central and South America for South American palm weevil monitoring and control. Products have been used for over 30 years, and there's been no adverse environmental impacts or human health problems from using these pheromones for weevil control. What we are planning to do with funding, if we can get it from the CDFA, is to run something that we call a tract and kill. The weevils cannot help themselves. They respond to that aggregation pheromone. And there is technology around where you can infuse that pheromone into a waxy dollop, and in that dollop, you have a small amount of insecticide. The weevils come to that dollop because they smell the pheromone. They think there's a male or female there to mate with. That's another thing about the aggregation pheromone. It's a male-produced compound, and it attracts males and females. But females are far more attracted to it. 66% of the weevils that you catch are females, so you have a good chance of wiping out large numbers of them. Attract and kill has been used in California previously for the control of medfly populations. They put out an attractant with some insecticide. The medflies come to it. They're curious. There's nothing there good for them to eat. And instead, the eugenol is laced with a small amount of insecticide, and that's what kills them. So there's a long track record of using this attract and kill technology for managing agricultural and invasive pests. But can we use it for South American palm weevil? I think we can. So we've trialed some of this technology against red palm weevil in Tunisia and in Saudi Arabia. You see Aja Noah here, the president of Iskatech. He's actually doing a demonstration here and just putting it onto the palm tree. This one was actually killed by red palm weevil. You can see the matrix here. It's a 2-gram dollop. It's kind of a waxy material. And in that material is the aggregation pheromone and the insecticide. The weevils are curious. They fly to it, they touch it, and they die. And we've done some behavioral studies on this. If you put about a small amount of insecticide in there, 3 to 7%, the weevils come to it because they're attracted by the pheromone. They only need to interact with it for less than 3 seconds. And more than 95% of those weevils will be killed. Also, if the weevil touches it, gets some of that insecticide on its body, and then it touches another weevil because they're walking around together, or they try mating with each other, you can get what we call horizontal transfer, where that weevil that touched the dollop then spreads the insecticide to a weevil that it touches, and you end up killing that weevil too. So you get 2 dead weevils for the price of 1. So we're running these trials now out in Rancho Santa Fe and Fairbanks Ranch. We have these 1/4 square mile plots, which we're monitoring for weevil activity now, and we're going to be testing different rates of these dollops. We're going to be putting out nothing, which is the control, to see what happens to the weevil populations, just what do they do naturally. How many weevils do we catch in the percussion traps if we put out a low rate of dollops, say 40 per 1/4 square mile, a medium rate of dollops, which is about 100 per 1/4 square mile, or a high rate of dollops, which is 250 dollops per 1/4 square mile. What we're hoping to see is that as the dollop numbers go up, we catch fewer weevils in our percussion traps that are in the center of these study plots because we are killing the weevils. And we will have replicated these treatments 3 times throughout Rancho Santa Fe and Fairbanks Ranch. So we'll have 3 treatments of controls, 3 of the low rate, 3 of the high rate, and 3 plots with the medium rate. We haven't started this yet. We're just running the baseline trapping with the percussion traps to get an idea of what weevil activity is like in this area. There are lots and lots of dead palm trees out here. We know that South American palm weevil is in this area. To deploy the dollops, we're going to be putting them in these traps, and we'll just hang them on trees. That way, when we're finished, we can remove all the dollops, and there'll be no environmental residue left behind from this project. These are really nice traps. The weevils can enter through the sides, or they can come in through the ends. They're flat, so they can walk in, touch the dollop, get a lethal dose, hopefully fall out of the trap and die, or fly off into these bushes here and die. So to monitor the activity of the weevils, we'll be putting out these percussion traps, and we will be monitoring them every month. And what we are hoping to see as we deploy attract and kill dollops, the number of weevils we start catching in these traps goes down because we're either killing them or they can't find the traps because there's just too much pheromone out there, and we end up confusing them. So what about the insecticide? What are you using? Well, the active ingredient is cypermethrin. We're going to use it at a rate of about 5%. And this is a commonly used contact insecticide. It's probably in your house. If you have a can of fly spray, this may be one of the insecticides that's in that can of fly spray. And it's a fast-acting neurotoxin. And we're using it at very low rates. So like here, for example, it's in your fly spray like Raid, Ortho, and Combat for killing cockroaches too. Okay, but it is toxic to fish and some aquatic insects and bees, but because we're using those dollops, we're not expecting any non-target exposure of the insecticide to those non-target species. So I'm going to wrap it up here now. We have this website. If you can help us track the spread of South American palm weevil through Southern California, please log on to this website when you find infested or dead and dying palm trees. You can upload a photograph. You can leave your contact details if we need to follow up. You can provide us a street address or a GPS coordinate, and we're loading all these points onto a Google Earth map so we can track the spread of South American palm weevil throughout San Diego County and as it starts to push into new areas of Southern California. So we're relying on community scientists to help us follow the spread of this weevil. This is the quickest way to get to the website. If you have your cell phones, just bring them out, click, draw up the QR, quick code scanner, quick read code scanner, and then just scan this code and it'll take you to the website. You'll find information on South American palm weevil there, and you can also, if you're seeing dead palm trees around in your area, please start loading those data in for us, and we will use those for our spread monitoring studies. Had a lot of funding from the USDA, California Department of Food and Ag Specialty Crops Project, California Date Commission has helped out too, and West Coast arborists have been really great. A lot of people to thank, especially like to thank Christina Hoddle, my wife. She's helped with all the field surveys, flight mill studies. Mike Lewis has done the drone work out the Sweetwater Reserve and filled in for me when I was unable to do the monthly trap clearance studies, and Ruth helped with some of that too. All right, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you guys right now. I've gone over time, sorry, but there was a lot to cover.
Oh, all right, I'm done. That was excellent. And we still have plenty of time for questions.
Great.
If anyone has any additional questions, go ahead and stick them in the Q&A, and we will go over those now. So I think you covered how far east it moved in your presentation already.
Yep. Yeah, so out towards El Cajon and up around the San Marcos and Sanitas Oceanside area.
We have a question on, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in those records of live adults out in Palm Desert and the Coachella Valley, but no confirmation of established populations out that way yet.
One question was, were those ones in the Coachella Valley found in a tree, and what species?
Right, so the ones that were found in Palm Desert by the hikers were just walking around on the sand, from what I can tell from the photographs that they posted on iNaturalist. They had them in their hands, and those are research quality photographs. There's no doubt that that's South American palm weevil. And no, they weren't in palm trees. They just found one or two of them just like walking around. And it's like, wow, big weevil, very obvious. What is this? Took photographs of it and was identified as South American palm weevil. I've checked those photographs. I agree, it probably is. This is the only weevil of this size and this color that's found in California. It's the biggest weevil we have established in the state now. So definitely can't confuse it with the much smaller agave weevils.
Next question is if you can discuss the impact on birds with the pesticide use, and how to, maybe if there's ways to eliminate that.
Yeah, so I think the risk to non-targets really comes with those spraying of those contact insecticides, where you might be shooting a pressurized jet of water with insecticide, maybe 50, 60 feet up into the air. There's going to be a lot of spray drift. Those trees are going to be dripping with insecticide. Birds, bees that go into those trees afterwards are going to be exposed to those insecticides. So probably the best thing to use if you need to protect those palm trees would be those systemic insecticides that are applied as soil drenches or as injections or paints to the trunk. They'll be contained within the palm. They will then concentrate in the crown region, and birds and bees should not be exposed to any of that crown apical meristematic tissue, because they're just not deep into the crown. They won't be feeding or touching that material. So that may be the best way to get around risks to birds and bees. And especially don't apply any of these materials when your palms are flowering if you're worried about the bees and stuff going to those flowers.
And then I believe you have instructions and supply lists for creating the trap buckets on the website. Is that correct?
That's right, they're up. I need to modify that now and give you a lead on how to put those funnels in. Because those funnels, when they go into those entry holes, work great. The weevils go in and they fall out. And then it's very hard for them to come back up and find that narrow opening. So yeah, so we should probably update those with some of that funnel information. You can just glue it in with a hot gun and they work great.
And we have a question about the type of traps, whether they're on the ground versus hanging. Does that impact the number of weevils that enter the traps?
Yeah, so with the percussion trap study, we hung them and we put them on the ground, and there's really very little difference in the trap numbers that we were getting. We just recommend putting the percussion on the ground. It's designed to go on the ground and it works great. The weevils will walk along the ground and go into the trap. In Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East where we've worked on red palm weevil, where they do use the bucket trap, the holes, those guys will dig a hole in the soil and just put the bucket trap in the ground up to where the holes are. And sometimes they'll even cut down a piece of palm trunk, hollow that out, put the bucket in that up to the holes, and the weevils just walk along it and then go in the hole. So yeah, if you can place it on the ground, that might be best. With the percussion trap, you may have noticed we had rebar holding the trap to the ground because we were worried about raccoons, possums, and maybe skunks trying to get in there to get the fermenting bait, because it does smell quite a lot. That is one of the advantages of hanging the bucket trap, is you can eliminate some of those curious mammal problems. However, some of you may have heard this before, the bucket trap with those holes, rats and mice can easily get in there and feed on the weevils that are in those traps. And amazingly to me, as bitter as that glycol stuff is, they will take the weevil out, they will sit on the lid of the trap, and they're very fastidious. They will eat that thing. They will leave the wings and the legs and the snout behind. So even though they've been eating my weevils, I can do some forensics. I can just count up the number of wings and the snouts, and I can tell how many weevils were eaten and what the sex of those weevils were. They just eat the plump bodies. So putting the funnels in also keeps out the rats and mice. Yeah. So that's another advantage to having the funnels inserted into the bucket trap. And the rats and mice, they can't get into the percussion trap. That opening at the top is too narrow for them. But yeah, if you hang up the bucket trap, you may end up feeding the rats. And the rats seem to be quite an effective predator of these palm weevils in the field. So at the Sweetwater Reserve, for example, on the smaller palms that I can actually look into, you will see an amazing amount of rat feces all around those palms, where they've been getting into the top to feed on the pupae, the adults, and the grubs. But obviously that predation by rats is just not sufficient enough to knock the populations back. So it's kind of an opportunistic response to easily accessible pupae and larvae, probably adults too.
Excellent, thank you. A next question, we're a little bit over, but I think there's two more questions here.
Sure.
So it was about the exit holes on the trunk.
Yes.
And is that from downward boring from the crown and then emerging outward, or are they boring in?
Yeah, good question. I think that's probably activity from the weevil. Maybe, actually, I don't know. I can't answer that question. I'm not sure, because it is possible there might have been a small amount of damage on the trunk and the female laid her eggs there, and the weevil larva just went straight in through the side. That's possibly what has happened. So yeah, I'm not sure why that one part. That is so rare. I think it's the only photograph I have of trunk damage like that. So yeah, I don't really know what's going on there. So in areas where edible dates are grown, you will get palm weevil going in through the trunk, but that tends to occur where the offshoots happen. And there's a lot of meristematic activity at the base of the trunk, or sometimes coming part way up the trunk where the offshoots are, and the weevils will go in through that area to access the trunk. But yeah, that's on edible dates that are producing these offshoots or these pups, and they can be harvested, and that leaves a wound, and then the weevils will go in there.
And the final question is about Balboa Park. So I should have an answer from my time there.
That's your old stomping ground.
But I'm now with the county and I don't have all of my old files. So there is a question here on what percentage of palms in Balboa Park have succumbed. And we were monitoring that. I had a inventory of all of the palm species that could be affected and which ones have been attacked or killed. And so that data is out there for you, Sandra. Ask the current horticulturist if he can look that up for you, because I left that info for him.
Yeah. So I think overall it's fair to say that Canary Island date palms are way, way, way out in front of every other palm species and being attacked. And those other records of the Bismarckias and the Jubeias and the Pritchardias and that, those are single-digit attacks for the most part. And you're talking about Canary Island date palms, you are probably into the 5 digits, at least, maybe 6 digits now, of palms killed by South American palm weevil. They have a very strong preference for the Canary Island date palms. But once they're in that enables them to get to their less preferred varieties.
Yeah. Oh, well, we've been seeing all kinds of different species around here as you went over. So I actually learned about a whole bunch of new species they've attacked in this presentation. So it seems like they're definitely going after all kinds of things, but hopefully we'll be able to control them with your new research.
That's the plan. And please, if you're able to report findings, dead palms, get them to our website so we can continue to track the spread of this thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark and
all right, thank you.
Deb.
Oh, there was another question of what do the adults feed upon?
Oh, yes. So the adults feed on ripe fruit. So in the lab, we feed them apples and bananas, and they love it. And I've had photographs of people of very ripe, maybe overripe figs with lots of palm weevils on them, feeding on them. And they're known to feed on papaya. They'll feed on ripe avocados hanging on trees. So yeah, any ripe fruit, maybe once it's gone past and starting to maybe ferment up a little bit, there's a good chance you might find adult palm weevils getting a carbohydrate fix, sugar fix from those ripe fruit. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just going to clear 2 more that we're here in case wasn't sure if you got them. Sandra also asked if there were any natural predators.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so in California, the only thing we've seen are rats, but I had a grant for this, but COVID stopped me from doing this work. There is a parasitic fly that can kill about 70% of these palm weevil larvae in Brazil. And luckily for me, I've just had an undergraduate finish in our lab. She has dual citizenship, speaks Portuguese and English. She's an excellent entomologist. She is going to work with a friend of mine, George Torres in Brazil, and she's going to do a master's work on South American palm weevil, hopefully with a focus on the parasitic fly that attacks this pest. And we may have a very good lead in to working with this natural enemy, possibly bringing it back to California in the future for biological control of this devastating problem.
That's good. And Gordon Mann had asked if the Coachella Valley palms could they have been moved, and the weevil brought the weevil with it.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's possible. We don't know.
Don't know.
Yeah. So assuming that nobody's been moving infested palms into the Coachella Valley, these super dispersers are another way that they could get there, because at this stage there are no known records of infested palms in Southern in the Coachella Valley. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I think that's it. So
all right.
Mark, if you want to forward on the QR code, I can also send that out to everyone who attended so they can get a link to that. And
that'd
to
be
the
great.
Website for more information. But thanks everyone who attended.
Yeah, thank you.
Got all your names for the ISA CEUs, and we'd like to thank Mark for a great talk.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. All right. Please
bye, everyone.
Report infested palms. I can hear another voice. Is there somebody asking a question? Nope.
No.
Okay. All right. Time to go before I get bogged
Great.
down with more questions.
All right.
All right.
Thanks,
See you later, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay.